we wanted to open up for questions. I think we're going to start with Jen Rash, who's helping us, who's going to share some of these questions, and I'll respond to the ones that I can. I'll have my colleagues here help me out in responding as well.
So first, somebody asked, how will the character of the town center be maintained, specifically the Third Place Commons, the public library, and consideration for rents for small businesses?
Well, I think as Chris just mentioned, the character aspect is something that will be a part of any process of designing any type of project, right? It starts with being an authentic place. And so I think our experience suggests that today's patrons of any retail are pretty picky in where they want to spend their time and spend their money. And as a result, the place needs to be nice, needs to be clean, needs to be safe, needs to be accessible, it needs to check all those boxes, it needs to be easy to get in and out of, there needs to be great signage, and there needs to be a quality grouping of retailers that would make people want to come and participate in that process. So in terms of character, in regards to the Third Place and the Commons, I actually got together with the owners of Third Place Books last week. This is kind of the special sauce of Lake Forest Park is what we're sitting in right here is the Commons. And I think other owners try to replicate the type of activity that happens here. And we believe that in any future redevelopment plan, the Commons would have to be a key component of that plan. And so whether perhaps there's an opportunity to improve upon it by creating more of an indoor-outdoor type of an opportunity with, other restaurants and retailers clustered around it. But the Commons, absolutely, we think Third Place Books as well is a key component to that. So figuring out how to keep those close together. One observation we had regarding the Commons was, and I've mentioned it to the city, is, our arrangement with the library downstairs, they act as any other tenant here in the shopping center. They pay a market rent, and they are a tenant of ours. And we could see perhaps the city coming in a similar arrangement for the Commons that would make the Commons more financially viable. Obviously, building a new building would have some expense to it. So perhaps there's some arrangement where the city could lease that space. The Friends of Third Place could still program it and operate it. And then the library, we see them as well as a key component. And to the extent that they wanted to remain here, we would look for ways to do that. Small businesses, there's always an opportunity to have, and you want to have the right mix of the types of tenants that would come and be a part of any offering here. When we started kind of engaging with the community in 2017, we sent out a survey. We got about a little over 500 people who responded, and the majority of people, when we asked them, what would you want to see in any type of a redevelopment? And the main thing people said was, more restaurants and better offering for food and beverage types of operators, so we don't have to drive to our neighboring communities, and a place for boutiques and small businesses. And so we see that there's a demand there for that, and that would be a part of what we would try to do. Hopefully that answers that question.
So I think you touched on this a little bit in your opening about supporting the current tenants, but somebody asked what's being done to support our shops through any moves or planned transitions. I know nothing's happening yet, but you kind of touched on that earlier.
Yeah, so a lot, and I mentioned it with Sound Transit, a lot of the changes that will occur as a result of Sound Transit, we can't really quantify or identify all of the impacts that will happen. But we know that there are ways to positively respond to those changes, and we want to, and we've had meetings, and we have meetings on a regular basis with all of our merchants here that we want to be a good steward of their businesses and make sure that they remain viable, and work together with them as Sound Transit and those changes occur. There will be impacts, there will be disruptions to business. Anytime there's construction on a site that's of this shape, first and foremost, there will be some transition period, and the best we can do is just commit to working together to try and solve those problems in a meaningful way.
So this is in reference to any potential redevelopment. Somebody asked, are you going to buy any of the residents that are surrounding the town center to expand on the current footprint of the zones?
That is not a plan. No, we do not plan on expanding our footprint. If Starbucks or Windermere wanted to sell, I don't think the city's a seller of City Hall, but I don't think I'd want to own City Hall anyway. Then we would consider those because they're contiguous to the rest of our ownership.
Another person asked, how did this property get zoned for apartments?
So going back to the 2004-2005 process that I mentioned earlier, the city actually adopted, the zoning was put in place at that time to allow for a mix of uses, including residential. And you heard us mention a number of times this 66-foot height limit, and that is what was adopted at that time through a series of bonuses and incentives of how you could get to the 66 feet, which is why we were trying to respect that in the images that we showed you.
With respect to this person, I'm going to read this card exactly as it's written. Merlone Geyer is noticing the drop in retail probably because of tech/Amazon and is proposing increasing housing on town center property to offset this decrease. Problem, Houston. LFP only has 46% commercial property, thus LFP cannot afford to lose any commercial property. So, how do you propose to preserve the LFP commercial space and keep it as an attraction for the whole community? I think we've touched on this a little bit, but maybe just to elaborate.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we're not proposing to get rid of. Hopefully, you saw in our plan that there are one of our concepts assumes that the entire lower level basically remains as retail. We don't know what the world's going to be like 10 years from now. The reality is today, the tenants that we have here are doing well. Our grocery and drug anchored business is what we invest in up and down the coast, and that's primarily what this shopping center is. There are some additional uses here that are a bit unique from what we typically own, but that at the end of the day, we feel comfortable and confident that grocery and drug types of uses will attract a tenant base that will remain viable for the foreseeable future, despite of what's happening with Amazon. In fact, in our portfolio, there are only a handful of business categories whose sales are down as a result of any type of an online arbitrage type of a presence. And so we're investing in retail. We think the retail is viable. That being said, the reason why we're showing the housing here is that for any meaningful redevelopment to occur, there would have to be some changes to the existing uses. And by removing existing commercial square footage that is viable, you would need to replace that with housing. It's the only other use that makes sense in this context. We wouldn't build office buildings. I wouldn't build an industrial building. This isn't a hotel market. It would be housing. That housing could be condominiums. It could be market rate rentals. There could be some affordable component of those of that housing as well. And the point of showing that is that there are the opportunities for that mix of uses. What's interesting is with that mix of uses, I know there's a lot of concern, and I'll just address it right now. I don't know if there's a question about traffic. So with traffic, it's important to understand if there's an addition of housing, there would first have to be a reduction in commercial square footage. Commercial square footage is a much higher traffic generator than residential use. And so the uses actually offset one another. When there's a reduction of that commercial and then an addition of housing, the uses offset the traffic impact. So it's not like you're just layering on top. If there's going to be more households, there's also going to be a corresponding reduction in the amount of retail. Sometimes that concept is difficult to understand, but that would obviously all be analyzed and spelled out in the process that I laid out of going through a development agreement. There would be an analysis, and most likely we would look at a range of housing densities and commercial square footages, and then look at how those that quantity of traffic would compare against how it is today. So hopefully that answers the question about traffic. There's obviously a lot more detail related to traffic that as we get into the details of how much housing and how much square footage, that needs to be analyzed and looked at.
Along the lines of traffic, we did receive quite a few questions about that, so I'm glad you answered that. We also received questions about parking, and anticipations of, will we reduce the number of parking, add, or do we expect about the same number of parking spots just based on our conceptual plans?
Okay. So right now, the town center, there's about 850 stalls on our property. We also have shared parking agreements with our adjacent property owners that gets us to about 950, almost 960 stalls, which works out to about 4.5 per thousand of parking stalls, which is actually a market standard. And in all of our plans, you may have seen a lack of parking because it's within the footprint of the buildings. And so the thought is that there would be parking structures that would house sufficient parking for the residents. There'd be access control to make sure that people who are coming to go grocery shopping aren't parking in the residential parking lots. But you also saw that we assume surface parking for any type of a grocer. It's just a requirement for every grocer that we work with that they have surface parking lots. And so we assume about 4.5 per thousand parking dedicated to retail and about 1.2 parking stalls per residential unit. That's what we assumed for our concepts that we put together here. Obviously, these are concepts, again, similar to the traffic. There's analysis that needs to occur before any definitive plan or agreement is made.
And the last question we have that I found interesting is, how do you pay for your...
How do we pay for... Interesting. So we've been in business a little over 27 years. We run a fund-based model where we invest on behalf of a group of endowment funds primarily, and so we have money to carry out these types of projects. By being in business for the amount of time that we have the ability to secure loans and to execute these types of projects. We also on the execution of the construction, sometimes we bring in partners, sometimes we do it all ourselves, sometimes we sell portions of the property and work with other adjacent owners to carry that out. But we do have sufficient financial capacity to carry out a project like this.
With that, we have 45 minutes if you want to come up and ask a question. I invite you to, or you can...
I wish we had mobile microphones that we could... Yeah, they don't have wireless mics, so if you...
You can line up at both microphones and...
So there's one here and one here.
You said there were 3 phases. You're thinking about doing 3 phases, A, B, and C. Is that the order that you were envisioning, that you would do A first, then B, then C? And also, then what would be a rough timeline for the phasing, the different phases?
Okay, thank you. So this was not a plan. We're not presenting these as a construction type of a plan, right? The reason we called them zones because we don't know exactly how the phasing would occur. And the reality is zone A that we showed, I can go back to that. Zone A that we showed could be sound transit parking structure, or it could be another residential building. I think we pointed that out. The reason why we are showing both these options is we don't know exactly where that's going to occur. However, we do know, because we've heard from Sound Transit, 2024 is when they want to be revenue generating. And so to the extent that this was the path for Zone A, and it needs to be open by 2024, that means they're probably going to need to start construction sometime in 2022. So to give you a sense of timeline, in terms of the upper level, we have existing tenants in place, so the timing for when this would start is undetermined. We don't know at this point. But this could be, which button did you push? There you go. This could actually be 2 separate phases. So these are 2 separate buildings. They just happen to be in that zone that we were looking at. Sorry, Zone A, here we go, would be here, kind of where the professional office building is. Actually, there you go. Zone B is on the upper level, and then Zone C is here. And we showed a number of different concepts for what could occur. On Zone C, again, there are tenants that are in place. We don't know what the impacts will be to their business when Sound Transit arrives. We don't know what their business model is going to be, and so that's why we showed a number of different concepts, and we would study kind of a range of housing and commercial retail and what that looks like.
You'll have updates on your website?
Yeah, absolutely, and it'll be more than just our website. I mean, if this is part of the reason why we're doing this is to see if this is something that the community ultimately wants us to move forward with. I'm not interested in just ramming something down everybody's throat. We want to make sure that what our plan is makes sense and it's in line with the objectives. And so there will be plenty of process that we would go through for that to occur. Okay, you're welcome.
Can you translate what 66 feet is? Is that like a retail and then 5 apartment stories on top, or?
Yeah, so actually, sorry, let me go to, there you go. So this is a 66-foot building. And one thing we didn't know, this red line is what the current setback is today. So we would only need to build 20 feet from our property line. Obviously, a road itself would need to be about 26 feet. A nice, comfortable sidewalk with landscaping is usually about 10 feet. And then this assumes residential buildings kind of spilling out there. Within 66 feet is about 6 levels, and it could be 1 or 2 levels of parking, and then another 4 levels on top of that.
Of apartment typically, or?
It could be apartments, it could be condos. The reason why we're not saying it's going to be condos is the laws in the state of Washington are very challenging for suburban type of condominium development right now. I know there's a lot of discussion at the legislature to try and make it more appealable. I think that would be phenomenal just for the housing crisis that's going on. That's definitely a missing piece. And so to the extent that condominium development made sense here, then we wouldn't preclude that from happening.
And so I know it's hard to project as things change, but in general, how many condos, apartments would you think would be on this property and of what size? Because I think people are concerned about that.
Sure. No, it's a great question. So we can just speak to what could fit kind of in these zones. That's sort of the way we approached it. And again, what ultimately gets built is more determined by what the market and the world looks like when we're able to do that development, if that makes sense. So looking at Zone A, this building here is about 136 residential units. In Zone B, each of these buildings is about 280 units. And then Zone C on the lower level, in this plan, this is about, I think it was another 360 or 400 units. And that's just to give you an idea. It's just a massing model. We just looked at, okay, what's the building footprint? And then we backed into, your question, unit sizes. That assumed about 750 square feet average unit size, which is kind of standard for the market.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're so welcome, thank you.
Do you have in considering the community response to the DEIS and the number of units, and knowing that the predominant feeling among the community was that that would be too many units, what are the minimum number of units you need on property for redevelopment to be financially viable?
We don't really have what I think make the best way to address that would be looking at this upper level, which is where we see the most meaningful amount of multifamily and the most likelihood of it occurring. And again, these are 2 separate 280 unit buildings. That may go up or down depending on unit sizes, things like that. But that at a minimum would need to occur. And then in the future, we'd need flexibility to be able to add housing potentially on the lower level if that was what was ultimately needed at the time for meaningful redevelopment to occur. And so If it's 600 to 700 units in an initial 1 or 2 phases, actually it would be less than that because it'd be 280 units in a phase, and each phase is usually 2 to 3 years of construction to lease up, maybe a little more than that. And so you wouldn't build all of it at once. I'm not trying to dance around your question, but there's not like a specific, yes, we need, X amount. We do need a meaningful number. If we were to tear down existing commercial square footage, there would need to at least be the opportunity to replace it with what's shown here.
Can I ask you to speak to 2 things also, John? One, in whatever vesting you request from the city, could you explain how public benefit would be part of each phase, not something that would be saved for like year 15? And also, could you justify or explain how you got to 66 feet? Because the one drawing you showed implies that 6 stories high. And my understanding of our current code is that you have a maximum within the current guidelines of 60 feet or a 4/1. So if you could just explain what you're thinking.
Yeah, so this building, answer that first question, this building does assume a 75-foot building, and that is to get to a market standard building height. So yeah, this shows what the current code is. We'd be asking for another 10 feet so we could build that additional level. And that is part of the analysis of, removal of commercial square footage. We do need that additional amount of height. On the lower levels, we think that there may be ways to accommodate the existing 66 feet.
So is that long base level, not a level, but on the ground?
Yeah, this is where the parking would be, and then this is up to 6. We're seeing construction types now that allows for type 3 modified wood construction that can get to 6 levels of wood frame on top of that concrete, or the lower level being concrete itself. Back to your other question about components of a development agreement investing, that will all be part of a development agreement process. I can't stand here in front of you today and tell you what components of public benefits would be a part of that. It's always a part of what plan we present, how that's received, and what the implications are for impacts that are associated with it, and providing enough assurances that the things that Chris Snyder's pushing for and wants to see incorporated into the project, that there's enough comfort in the development agreement that those types of public benefits, the placemaking types of elements, could be incorporated, right? As well as items that are identified through any type of traffic analysis, the impacts that and the mitigation that would be associated with that. Those are the types of public benefits that would be incorporated into a development agreement. And typically those development agreement terms are 15 to 20 years. We've seen them longer than that in the region, and that just allows for certainty both for the city as well as for us as a property owner that we're vesting to a certain set of codes that can be relied upon to build out the project.
I think, James, can you just speak to that there would be phases of public benefit, not, she was saying that it won't all happen.
Oh, so the question was, thank you, that it won't all happen at once. There'll be phases of public benefit. And yeah, typically the way we look at it, and we've done it in our other projects in Shoreline Linwood right now, where kind of each phase would be tied to a set of required on-site and off-site components, right? So that's typically how it gets worked. So if you start work in this zone, then you would be required to, build these on-site and off-site types of improvements to the extent that there are any that are required. Okay.
Thank you for holding this meeting.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming.
So you mentioned at the beginning the parts are going to change over time. You also mentioned the uniqueness of this community, that we are environmentally and ecologically very supportive of those things.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of plans do you have in terms of sustainability in your building that can help mitigate the climate crisis we're in right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. What we've learned through, and the state of Washington is kind of at the forefront of the code requirements as it relates to stormwater as well as sustainability. and I'm going to answer this, and then I'll see if any of my colleagues have something to add, because they're a lot smarter than me. But we've seen there's a Built Green program that the Master Builders Association in the state of Washington has created that's similar to LEED, but it's even more it's more widely accepted by both municipalities and by communities and developers. So the Master Builders Association Built Green program is something that in multifamily housing you see contributing to that. What we've also learned as it relates to stormwater in particular is that a lot of the analysis that's done on impacts to adjacent tributaries and to waterways is the best thing that can be done for those waterways is to redevelop large surface parking lots that have minimal infiltration and a considerable amount of impervious surface. And so the best thing that could be done for the environment as it relates to this property is for there to be some redevelopment, to be honest, to replace some of that parking lot with more pervious surface, so that there's more filtration. And as Chris mentioned, there's ways to incorporate that into the landscape and the design that have significant improvement opportunities for the environment.
Or is there out to see, are we out to see even like the Bullet Center has done, where they've had solar panels on the tops that over the footprint of the buildings and those sorts of things?
Probably not to the level of the Bullet Center. That's a pretty, I think that's like one of 3 buildings almost in the country that has like net zero impact, and there's a reason for that. But there are, again, the incremental benefits and gains associated with some of those higher levels of requiring or of sustainability requirements are not typically seen in the types of construction that you'd be experiencing here.
So to clarify, that means probably no.
Not the Bullet building, no.
I'm talking about solar panels.
Solar panels, yeah. Parts of the Built Green program that I mentioned include opportunities for solar panels. In the retail world, we don't see solar panels being typically used just because retailers are the ones that are driving their build out and the usage of their electricity, and a lot of times they're not interested in participating in a solar program.
Right, it just helps me keep in mind that we're trying to change in the future.
Understood. Yep, of course.
As a small business owner involved,
Yes.
those of us that are currently renters have a concern about, do you currently have an agreement with South Transit? And how is that going to impact parking in our businesses? Is there going to be some kind of trade-off where if we have the parking lot all covered up with staging, if we don't have parking for our guests, it's going to affect our
Thanks.
businesses?
I got some water. But
How do you perceive that?
we'll be right here working with you. To be honest, that's going to impact us and not just you. It's going to impact all of our tenants, right? To answer your question, we don't know yet. We haven't seen Sound Transit specific plans. I think they're working through that process right now. But I know I've talked to our property managers, and they've been asking me because we've been working with Sound Transit, and I know Sound Transit's going through a public process right now, and those are all questions that we have right alongside you. And so we'll continue to work with all of the existing businesses, just so as we learn new information, we can figure out how we're going to respond and adapt. I wish I had a better answer for you. I don't think they're far enough along in their process for us to know, exactly where and what all those impacts will be. There will definitely be an impact, though. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. Hello.
First of all, I want to say thank you for having us. I do feel better.
Thank you.
Listening to this.
Thank you.
It's very positive, really.
Thank you.
I do have a challenge for you.
Okay. I like
My
challenge.
challenge is get to know us better.
Okay.
We are not Linwood. We're not Shoreline. We are only 17 acres. Not very much. We're funky. We're different. Things that work elsewhere don't work here.
Mm-hmm.
We don't go for shiny new things. We're all old, well, we're not all old, we've got lots of kids running around, but we think about everything way too much. Get to know us first. Bring some of us on board if you can. We're not like the others. I guarantee you we're going to be good.
I understand. Thank you so much. I appreciate the honesty.
Thank you for having your meeting.
Thank you.
My comment kind of follows on hers in that there are many of us who are long-term residents of Lake Forest Park and love living here, partly because it's peaceful and it's quiet and it's different.
It is beautiful, yeah.
It is beautiful, and we'd like to keep that, of course. And I've talked to a lot of my friends. I mean, we've made a lot of connections, of course, in the community. And those of us in a certain generation that are getting older all talk about, you know, the rumors we've heard about the center and the changes in the housing and everything. And one of the things everybody keeps saying to me is, wouldn't it be great if there was like a part of that housing that was for seniors and maybe adjacent to that, a daycare center, because those two levels, you know, if you talk to the younger people, our block, for instance, is turning over, and many of us are selling to younger people, and we have lovely little children on our block that we're very delighted with. And we talk to the younger parents, and they say, wouldn't it be great if there was a daycare center and a senior center, and those two generations could get together because they need each other. And so I was wondering if there's any thought or any place where something like that might get introduced into planning.
There could, absolutely. You know, in terms of the housing opportunities that we're talking about, we see that being a great kind of, it's a step down, it's a downsizing from the single family homes here. You may see people that want to live there who are thinking about buying a home, but they haven't found one yet, or they're looking to downsize. And so we're cognizant of that, and that's something that we'll you know, take into consideration as we're moving forward, especially the daycare. We have daycare operators in a lot of our other centers, and they make a lot of sense adjacent to transit structures as well. People can drop off their kids and go hop on the bus and go to work. And so, yeah, absolutely, all those things.
We don't want to stay here
Right.
as we get older, and we love it here, and so we'd like to have a place for seniors as well as the little ones.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Over here. Yeah.
I was one of those moms who took their kid to the water feature at the university.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, I didn't tell you. Fast. When someone from, I think it was someone in County or ecology, dealing with ecology, came to talk at City Hall in one of the open houses about the parking structure, I asked him, are you going to drill to see where the water is, to see where you can put the parking structure and how big it can be, how tall? And he said, no, we're going to submit plans and then we'll do the EIS. So I wanted to ask you, since they don't seem to have the freedom to do that, would you consider doing that so that you could have really more specific plans about where you could build and how high you could build?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't speak to Sound Transit. I'm sure they do their diligence and they have a way of going about things, but we need to understand what the soils are before we design any type of a building. And so that includes both the quality of the soils and what type of structure it can support, as well as any type of environmental considerations and water tables and things of that nature. So yeah, that would absolutely happen. As I mentioned, there's a building permit process that would have to occur and a building design process for any building that would happen here. And that would be part of it. And again, the state of Washington has very high requirements and thresholds to make sure that any building you're proposing is meeting those standards. So we would have to go through that.
Yeah, I think we'd all be really curious to see what you find.
Sure, I'm sure you would.
At your building and your design. My last point is that I love to see living walls whenever you build, especially adjacent to the street, so that when people drive by, they see green. That would be wonderful, and I think there are probably some low-cost options for that.
Okay, thank you.
Did you want to talk about how you're thinking about adding landscaping?
Yeah, I mean, I will just say landscaping and trees obviously are a key element to the placemaking components. Landscape architects, every plan we get from them is full of mature trees, and introducing native species of plants into any type of project. Those are part of your comprehensive plan, as well as the vision statement dating back to 2004. So those are components that we would also take into consideration. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate being able to hear some of what's going on.
You're welcome.
I resemble that remark about being a senior, but I sort of resent it because I play a lot of volleyball still.
Good for you. I could tell you've got the height for it.
Maybe the smart people could do, but I'm wondering if anybody from Lake Forest Park has brought to you the idea of a community center where people can play indoors. I can't be out in the sun, so I play indoor volleyball. I've been kind of wondering about this for quite a few years, and I've asked about it before, and they say the city of Shoreline has this possibility. Have you heard anything about that? Because if we're adding that many more people, then I think it becomes something we need to think about.
Yeah, going back to my comment about, and you are challenged here in that there's 16 and a half acres, and it's on a triangle. And so anytime you build on a triangle, your buildable area is even smaller than that, right? And then you add on that the prospect of some of that land being used for a parking structure. We start getting limited. I'll just tell you right now, we start getting limited on how many different uses could be incorporated. That being said, if there's something that we can study and there's a way that we could get comfortable with it, then we'll look at that. But I know an indoor type of a community center on privately owned property is sometimes a tricky situation. I think the way we looked at it was more of creating this type of community space and trying to improve on it, make it even more indoor outdoor. In terms of recreational opportunities, I think that is sort of the challenge that you have in Lake Forest Park, because there's not a lot of opportunities to, on city-owned land, for example, where that would typically occur. So maybe you don't like the answer. I'm sorry. I don't want to overpromise, though.
No, it's all right. I drive all the way to Tukwila so we can play volleyball sometimes.
Yeah.
And for seniors, we play senior volleyball.
That's awesome.
And they have a facility that has kids in there all day, every day. It's huge. We couldn't do anything like that here, I'm sure.
Got it.
But I just wondered if anybody had been discussing that, if anybody else asked.
Not with us. I'm doing some work in Shoreline, though. I'll ask and find out. I mean, do you guys go to Shoreline as well? Do they have volleyball?
We go to Shoreline, we go to Terrace, and then we go down to Tukwila, sometimes Bellevue. Yeah.
Got it. All right.
Okay,
cool. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. How's it going?
Hi, how you doing? Thanks
Great.
very much for
You're welcome.
presentation.
Thanks for coming.
All the amenities that you've put up there, and it looks like a pretty long list of amenities. I lived in Shoreline until about 4 years ago, and I was and actually just a block from the Sears.
Mm-hmm.
So I was pretty I got a little involved in the process there while they worked at the design for that. I think is that also your project?
Yeah,
right?
that is.
So.
So you were involved in the early planning process for the CRA or for?
Yeah, I went to the meetings and I just didn't. That's it.
Okay.
Just sort of like here.
Cool.
But that original design had a huge amount of amenities. It had a sound stage. It was partnered with the community college. It had a large open park space. It had a lot of traffic mitigation built into it. There was boulevards and so when I saw the actual design for the first part of it come out, it looks like it is a small dog run, about 700 apartments, and a bus stop. So
I resent that comment.
That's what they send out to people with business licenses in Shoreline. That's pretty much it. So I saw in your June 3 letter to the council that you pushed back pretty hard against having the amenities, or say the things that would benefit the citizens of Lake Forest Park, pushed back against having them be requirements. And I saw that it was strong language that said you wanted them as a guideline.
Yeah.
So, and I understand.
I'm happy to address that.
But I guess this is a little bit harder question than everybody else is asking. Why should we, as a group of citizens that have one shot at making a public place for ourselves in this space, think that you would do anything except build the most profitable parts of the project out first? residential.
Sorry, let me jot down all your questions. Well, I want to address the prescriptive elements. So in Shoreline, they put a community renewal concept together, and they made it very clear that whatever happened in the future was subject to a future developer. What we're actually proposing there is considerably more open space than what's required. What's required by the zone there is only 0.6 acres. We're providing over 3 acres of open space on that project, and it's coming in over a period of time. That was not, no. The development agreement time frame is 20 years, but that doesn't mean it'll take 20 years. It's just we need 20 years to have the flexibility in case there's another downturn and you can't build it all at once, those types of things, right? The types of amenities that we talked about, those are required in the development agreement in Shoreline, that we are required to provide certain programmatic elements in addition to now being committed to building that open space. We're considering going through the same process. The letter that I wrote to the City Council and Planning Commission was the cart was getting before the horse. We haven't even designed a project yet, and if you're trying to prescribe the amount of open space, what I didn't want to have happen was us not even be able to get to a point where we could present a project that was already in conflict with a newly adopted code. And so again, as you've seen here, we're not saying it's currently 20 feet setbacks. We're talking about 70-foot setbacks on the western side of the property. We're not overreaching in terms of what the current code would be. And so, in the response to, why should you think that we're going to do anything that's not what would make us the most money? I don't want to look at it that way. Hopefully, you guys can realize that we have to make money. I'm not in the business of going to I wouldn't have a job, right? Right. But what happens is, go to example, and I'm not suggesting this needs to become U Village, but U Village does extremely well because it's a really great place. And they don't have to be mutually exclusive. Just because we are going to do something where we'll make money, it actually means that we'll have better retailers and restaurants that want to be here if there's more foot traffic and if there's quality space that people want to enjoy. Right? And those things can be integrated into a development agreement to give the community assurances that the level of design and the phasing and those things make sense for the community. We're not suggesting that.
Those things are usually integrated into the code. They're not suggestions. They're things that you're required to do. And so
that's what the development agreement would do.
It makes me wonder if I can really do those things. And also, U Village, I don't know if you agree, this was built out before the current residential building. So you had reasons to build other products there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the development agreement essentially provides those assurances that may not be in the code. So that's really, and that is part of a public process. So that is the benefit of going through the development agreement process. The city introduced that language of allowing and essentially requiring a development agreement, recognizing that the code would need some modifications, and the state code allows for those types of modifications to occur within the development agreement. Is there anything anybody wants to add on my team? Joe Brogan's the legal guy. He knows.
I think that folks here.
Do you want to come? We're going to let Joe say something. He's sitting there so politely.
I think I've lost about 3 pounds sitting under that spotlight, which is a good thing. I'm not complaining. I think Jameis answered the question, I think, honestly. The mechanism to get the certainty that I think the community and many of your leaders are seeking takes the form of typically 3 different avenues: the municipal code, guidelines that are applicable pursuant to that code, but more specifically and more often, it's the development agreement. So if there are assurances sought with respect to certain amenities being delivered during a certain phase, the development agreement is really the place to have that discussion. And so I guess just the takeaway is that there is a mechanism to address that very concern. And sometimes what you end, because I work with many municipalities across the state. And so we'll typically see a municipal code that does have some baseline open space and landscaping requirements. But we'll also see design guidelines that it varies by jurisdiction, but they're typically guidelines, not legal requirements, that then dictate how that landscaping or how that open space should be designed from the city's and the community's perspective, right? And then ultimately, the development agreement is where the brass tacks are with respect to the timing of that and the actual design. And if there is a modification to the code, that's one thing that development agreements do. They include the vesting, and if everybody most of you probably understand what the vesting is. What vesting means in the state of Washington is after, in a nutshell, once you submit a complete application to a municipality in the state of Washington, you're vested or you're assured of being able to develop under the existing land use controls, ordinances that are in effect at the time your application is deemed complete. So the development agreement, it's a vesting tool, but it's also a mechanism for the city. It's a contract between the city or the county and the developer that specifies a term, potentially phasing, and other attributes or amenities. In this case, amenities that we are specifically considering based on the vision document that this community has developed in 2018 and may modify going forward. So that's all I'd add to that.
Thanks, Joe. Hopefully that answered the question in a bit more detail. Happy to talk more after. Yep.
Well, so I just want to follow on the earlier issue of checking the ground status for the parking ramp, or else, well, for a 6-story building, I suppose you want to have a fairly firm earth underneath that too. And the reason I want to bring it up is I remember twice an idea coming up about putting a parking ramp around in this area, probably for parking around. And twice I remember understanding from the college that oh no, we can't put a parking ramp there because the ground is not enough to deal with it. Mm-hmm. And so because it's come up these couple of times, I guess somebody knows what that earth is like, and so there's a way to be checking on that before you have too many plans run.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We have done some boring, so we know the general quality of the soils and the geological situation. But any specific locations where buildings will be built, we'll absolutely have to go through that process. So.
It just sounded like sort of going under the planning, which I understand you have to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes time for building permits, we'll have to go through that process, and we'll even do that beforehand as we start laying out any concepts for where buildings would be located.
It'd be so disappointing if our
right.
Ramp
You're telling me if we own it, that's not a good thing. Not a good call. Thanks.
How are you?
Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for providing this forum.
You're welcome.
Information. Make sure I can be heard.
We can hear you.
That's better. Most folks, a lot of folks here know me. I'm Norman Lieberman. I'm board chair of Third Place Commons.
Yes.
There was a statement made earlier that I just wanted to clarify. Third Place Books is a wonderful
separate
retail business for profit.
Understood.
Third Place Commons is, we like to think, a wonderful not-for-profit organization.
Understood.
And so we're always working to make that differentiation, and I want to make sure everybody in this audience knows that, because that's who we are. We're a not-for-profit, celebrating our 20th year.
Mm-hmm.
So
I apologize if there was any confusion caused by my statement, but
sure that no one walked away with a misconception that we are
absolutely
related. We grew out of it at some point, the founders of the books.
Right.
But that's not who we are today.
Right.
So,
And we want to stay in close contact with you and make sure that anything we have going forward, that we're staying in touch.
and we would really like to do that.
Sure.
And we already have, a relationship with that.
Right.
I think over time we need to grow that so that everyone here still has the benefit of Third Place Commons.
Absolutely.
So, thank you.
Thank you, Norm. Hello. Is there anybody over there? Okay.
So I'm married into a family that's been here since the 60s, and as I meet more and more people, I realize that a lot of people in the community have been here since the 60s. They've moved back here to raise their kids. They've moved back here to retire.
Mm-hmm.
And back long before you guys were even involved, we were involved in some of this planning stuff. And at the time when I was in my 30s, the only way I could kind of cope with the change that was probably going to happen, if I don't die in my house and get taken out in a coffin, I thought, okay, well, this area will be senior housing and resources for seniors. And that's come up earlier. And that was something that way back when was discussed. But I was just wondering where, I know you addressed it earlier a little bit, but if we stay here until the day we die, what's going to be there for us? These longtime citizens who've been here since this was wetlands.
Right.
It's because this is, you don't want to leave.
Right.
So,
Got it.
I guess that's my concern.
Sure.
I hear about, multifamily and kids and all this kind of stuff, which is awesome. But if we want to stay here when we're 80, is
Right.
it going to be possible?
That's a great question. I mean, as it is today, no, right? There's no place to live today. And if redevelopment doesn't happen, the answer is no. You'd find another place somewhere here in Lake Forest Park, or you'd have to leave. So I think that's why some of the plans were put in place, dating back to 2004, maybe even before then. I've only seen documents going back to 2004, but those are, as I mentioned in my response previously, those are all things that can be taken into account. There's a long time that's going to happen before we get to what the exact product type would be that would be built for that housing. But we hear that, and typically what is done when we look at creating housing is we do a detailed market analysis, and there's a lot of data in other projects we've worked on where it quantifies how many people in the next however many years are going to be looking to downsize and move into a smaller property, and that's taken into account both in terms of the types of amenities that are incorporated, the size of the units, the accessibility to parking and to other amenities. All that's kind of factored in when the time comes that you're designing and submitting a project for design review at a building level. We're just not there yet, but your points are really good for us to hear, so thanks.
And I just want to say, you're talking permeable concrete, right? Would you be doing that for the... In places, it can't be everywhere. Just the permeability of concrete is, it depends. For structural reasons, there are certain types of concrete that are more permeable than others and that are used in certain applications. So, okay, thank you. You were actually here first. I'm going to take her and then we'll go over there. Is that all right? All right. Yes.
It was an hour and 32 minutes before I heard my first favorite four-letter word. And Mayor Johnson knows what I'm going to say. Tree. Right, tree.
Three-letter word? Four.
Tree.
Trees.
Tree.
We talked about trees.
192 minutes in, and you said native, you get 2 points for that.
No, 2 points. All right.
I said tree originally because if you look around the parking areas, there's so few trees, we could name them. It
Yeah.
would be the Dumas tree, the Chris tree, and so on. And as far as safety, it is a lot safer to have 6 or 7 inch than the 4-foot bushes, which
Yeah.
I'm sure are 3 feet tall.
Right.
But my point is, if you can go back to the slide that has the red lines across it, that one.
Uh-huh.
You see the red lines?
Yes.
You see the trees?
Yes.
Wow. If you want to go up, even at that height, you'd be taller than the trees.
Oh.
Lake Forest Park.
Understood. So I think Glenn mentioned as he was talking through it, but you might have missed it because he didn't have he didn't have his nifty pointer here. Along Ballingers, there's a considerable number of amazing trees, and what we're showing here is no, it's within our property as well. There's portions of them within our property, and we're talking about maintaining that setback. Yep. And then, as you can see throughout our plan, there's a lot more trees in that plan than currently exists today. So, do you want to add something, Glenn? Glenn wants to say something.
Yeah, actually, sorry about that. I've actually forgot to mention earlier today, when we talked about retaining the trees on Ballinger, the other, all of these schemes that we just presented, again, these are just rough schemes, but everything we've presented retains all of the mature existing trees on the west side along the creek as well. So none of those trees would come down on that on the west side. We also, I left off earlier about, with the creek, all these schemes also respect all the required easements on the Lion Creek along the west side and the south side of the project. So.
Do you mean the area where you're taking off the trees by the creek by Buffalo Lake?
No, that wasn't us. That was in our project. That was a city project. Yes.
Well,
that was part of their. It was for flood control when they added that change to Lion Creek. Yeah.
This is all part of getting to know us, and I know you know us. You've been back, and we just want to remind you.
Thank you. Love it. All right. Yes.
Yeah, my question is around the neighboring areas right around the mall.
Yeah.
Any development is going to increase traffic. And as you know, Lake Forest Park is completely neighborhoods. Unlike Kenmore or your village, it's not surrounded by the business.
Mm-hmm.
So that means there's going to be an impact to all the people that live in the surrounding homes. And I just wonder how you're working with the city based on your experience and planning that you're doing and how they're going to mitigate that. There's very few crosswalks in Lake Forest Park. There's no traffic circles.
Mm-hmm.
The speed limits are 25 and often aren't followed. So the impact there is probably going to be real for the neighborhood.
Great question. So a couple of things there in terms of, I tell a lot of people had the same question. In terms of impacts related to traffic, so any traffic analysis would have to occur as part of this project going forward. Our back of the napkin and our initial analysis related to traffic based on this plan results in essentially a wash between the removal of existing commercial uses and the addition of residential uses. You're trading a higher intensity of traffic use for a lower intensity of traffic use, and so there'd essentially be no net additional impact related to traffic. That being said, any plan that goes forward or any development agreement would do a really deep analysis into traffic. That would be part of what we would need to do, and that would include looking at all of the traffic signals around the project. We also recognize that the city's gone through a safe streets process, and my understanding is that's being implemented throughout the city, and to the extent that any of those improvements are happening in and around the town center, we would want to tie into those projects and participate in that.
So when you talk about looking at like traffic lights and that type of thing, what's your circumference that you're talking about?
It's anywhere there's... The exact scope will be determined based on the exact project that we are analyzing at that point in time. We're just not there yet. These are very conceptual, but it will be part of that public process that I mentioned. So I just don't have definitive numbers for you right now because these are conceptual. I think we have 5 minutes left. So
just the pedestrian improvements that would happen in the town center to make it more.
Yeah, there was a point about, and maybe it was about the trees as well, that it is a little bit scary to walk through the town center right now. Just there aren't clearly defined pedestrian paths and things, and that would obviously be a desirable change. In this particular plan, you can't really see it here, but this would be essentially a pedestrian shared street where the paving patterns would be different. There'd be speed tables to slow down vehicles and to prioritize bikes and pedestrians alongside cars. And so those are types of planning principles that we would want to incorporate into any redevelopment. Yes.
Thank you. My comment is about density.
Yes.
Lake Forest Park is about 3 square miles. I believe we have 5,000 households at present. To add 1,100 units right here on these 16 acres, that would be a 20% increase in density. The Growth Management Act only requires, I think it's like 526 new units for all of Lake Forest Park over the next 20-some years. I do not think that we are required to become a large city. We have a designation as a small city, and we can stay that way. We are not required to become an urban transit center. So, to me, the effect of living in the surrounding neighborhoods of 1,100 units here with 2,500 more people. I think there's only 13,000 people in Lake Forest Park right now. It puts a whole lot of people right here. And quite honestly, there's not, even if you add some retail, there's not that much to do for people right here. So it's just a concern to me to add that much density into this small space, especially considering the fact that, as I've mentioned about 100 times, it is a wetlands and ridgeline. So.
Yep. So all right. Well, yeah. So that's part of the reason why we showed these different concepts related to what the future Zone C could look like, because we're not suggesting that all of this housing is going to be built or that that's what has to be built, but there is change that's coming. That's kind of the main takeaway I want everyone to have here, that if Sound Transit arrives, there will be impacts that occur, and being able to respond to that with housing and knowing what we know about the cost to tear down existing commercial uses and what would then need to replace it. There's a need for meaningful amount of housing to justify any type of meaningful redevelopment to occur. So it's just the reality. That's part of the reason we wanted to hold this meeting, was just so that you guys know that we as a property owner, we paid a certain amount for the property, and there's a limit on what we could do in terms of a threshold for residential units. And again, we need to study it and share with you more details, but these are some concepts of what that could look like. And we aren't there yet where I can tell you, definitive numbers, but we need to have the ability to respond to that change as it comes, and housing is a big part of that. So, yes.
I have a follow-up.
Yes.
To my previous question, because someone else brought up groundwater, and then you said you've done some boring, which you hadn't said when I asked my question. So, what kind of data do you have from the boring that you did?
It was preliminary borings that we do whenever we acquire property. So it wasn't specific to development. So we understand kind of what the general makeup of the soils are, but they're not in the locations of, for example, where the parking structure would be, right? And so that will come at a future time, a more detailed analysis related to the condition of the soils for constructability purposes.
Okay, because it's still somewhat confusing to me to come up with a plan and then do the
Nope.
testing. It seems like it would be the most practical to do the testing and then see what's feasible and then go back to the community.
That will be a part of this plan. Again, we kind of scheduled this meeting voluntarily based on where we saw kind of the conversations going with the city, and we don't have a definitive plan yet, but you can rest assured when we go through that process, we've done a lot of development, and that's part of what we will do.
Do you have any idea of the water table in the different areas at all? I'm just curious. It's a high water table on the lower level. I think on the upper portions of the site, there's more ability to get into the ground and to build buildings into that existing grade. But it varies on the upper and lower level. Thanks.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Any more questions? Yes.
Hi. So it sounds like that Sound Transit is going to be trying to do the majority of their development from 22 to 24.
From a construction perspective, yeah, they need to be revenue generating by 2024 is what we've been told.
So you're supposing that the property is going to be pretty torn up during that time, 22 to 24, with whatever Sound Transit is going to be doing. Do you also want to be doing some of your own redevelopment during that same time, or are you going to be trying to do it after?
Potentially, if that's what we're able to do. I mentioned there's a number of leases that are kind of deciding factors on whether we can do that or not. And so it's time will tell of how those businesses respond to the disruption that you mentioned will inevitably occur as a result of any construction that happens from Sound Transit.
But it sounds like that time, 22 to 24, is when there's going to be major disruptions going on.
Yeah.
And it might be all Sound Transit, but it might be that and some things that you guys will do.
Potentially, and there are challenges anytime there's new construction, right? And you try and mitigate the haul routes and the disruption in the parking and businesses the best that you can. And we happen to have property that's, for example, in Federal Way, I'm dealing with a light rail station that's being built across the street from the mall that we own there that is taking out a couple of our businesses and going to be disruption, and working through that. We also own property in Linwood across the street from Sound Transit's new light rail station, and they're widening 200th in Linwood, and that's going to have impacts on our property. So we're part of this growth, growing pains, I guess, that the region's experiencing, and the construction impacts are inevitable. Yeah, unfortunately, just try and deal with them the best you can.
So those sound like they're going to be pretty rough years, 2020.
Could be. I don't know.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, for sure. All right. I think that's all the time we have. I do appreciate you guys being here. Like I said, we'll be posting this. We had this recorded so that if you have people who were not here who would like to see it, we'll post it on lfptowncenter.com. And yeah, thank you for coming.